This week in post, a photo teardown of a simple beach scene. Hi everyone, I'm Scott Davenport. Welcome to In Post. Thanks for joining me today. And if this is the first time you're checking out one of my videos, thanks for giving me a shot. I hope you like what you see and you'll subscribe to the channel. Today is a photo teardown, and what this is we'll take a photo I've done processing on and we'll break down the fundamental steps that went into creating the final image. This is a photo I shared during In the Field earlier this week, one from the visit out to Silver Strand Beach in Coronado. It's a very empty beach, and so this may be similar to a lake or a shoreline that you have near you. This is really the only photo I actually liked from my outing, so I'm glad that I got one keeper, because one keeper is better than none. Well, let's have a look here. Now, this is kind of the beginnings of the processing. As I process this, I forgot to create the snapshots that I normally would use to illustrate the processing. So we're going to need to do a little backtracking here so I can get you to the original state. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset the spot removal. I'm going to reset tone. And I'm going to switch back to Adobe Color. Now this is what came out of the camera. There may be a minor crop here, but it's minimal at best. So this is all right. You know, the bones of this photo are pretty good. Don't really like the sunspot and everything. But as I looked at this in color, I was like, maybe I'll keep it in color some point. Maybe I won't, but I liked black and white better. So I'm going to press the undo here, and that's going to switch us back to standard black and white. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go with black and white here for this. This one works for me better. Next thing we did was those basic adjustments there. So got the contrast, got the highlights, the black point. Black point went down very far, really brought those shadows down. And it made this foreground area very deep. And so there's a clear separation now between the sand, the surf, and even in the sky, we're getting this more triangular shape here starting to take form. Now this continued to bother me, this sun peeking through the clouds here. So the next thing was to do the spot removal. So I'll add the spot removals back in. That mainly, the obvious thing is it got the sun brushed away there. And there were a few other dust spots on my sensor here and there that I got cleaned up. But other things, you know, like these are actually little shells and things out here. I left all those in. Those didn't bother me. And when you look at the photo at full size, those look normal. Those are, you know, little pebbles and things that make sense. So what happened next? I didn't do anything with clarity or dehaze. I like the softer feel. I mean, I did a long exposure. It would be counterintuitive then to start making all of this sharp again. If I wanted it sharp, don't take a long exposure. What I did is I did go into the black and white, and let me turn that on. So I did a little more mixing on black and white. And we'll really notice the difference in the sky. So before and then after. And so here is getting darker, hints of darkness through here, and this is getting darker too. Again, really reinforcing that triangular shape and having that, you know, roughly mimicked on the bottom. This is adding a dynamic element into the scene. It's drawing the eye inward toward this, you know, thin strip of land that I've got out there. Next is the tone curve. Let's take a look at that. I'll turn that back on. So gentle S-curve, really darkening the foreground. Now on the video, this probably looks very, very dark. Nothing's clipped, and when we look at it, like if I look at it in my full size thing, it feels good. And I can still see the different striations of some darker sand and shadowy areas with lighter sand. But I liked that richness of this area becoming nice and dark and really accentuating the brighter reflections there. And it brought out a bit more of the textures in these ripples of sand. And that's what initially drew me to take the photo. So I want those to be captured in the scene, as well as, you know, the nice clouds going on here. All right, so what happened after that is localized adjustments. So let's take a look in our gradients, and I'll turn that one on. And watch the sky. Off, on. So what's going on here? Well, we're darkening, but we're also using a range mask. So, sorry, I'm not darkening. I actually am using clarity, but I'm using a Well, I'm not using a range mask on this one. Oh, I stand corrected. So I'm taking advantage of clarity, not so much to exaggerate edges. If I started pushing contrast, pushing clarity, especially if I do it globally, it's going to accentuate too much. But what the clarity is going to do is localize the darkness, make that darker, the brightness, make that brighter, especially this little streak kind of weaving its way through here, and give us more dimension in the sky. I had to pull short of making it too crisp because I don't want to have it too crisp. But the, whoops, let me get off that hover there. That just adds, more clarity, more dimension, right? It's fully accentuating. I like my black and whites to have deep blacks and very bright whites. Now let's move on to Radial Filters. Let me turn that on. And this one's a bit more subtle, but I've got a few pins out here. I've got one here, 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 and here. And these are all using a variety of range masks, so these are very, very subtle changes, and I'll just hover over them as I'm talking. But I'm using those to darken certain areas of the clouds. One more up here. Hover there for a minute. And this one is probably my brightening one. Here we go. That one's a brightening exposure, right? So what am I doing? It's a variation on a theme. I'm again accentuating the shadows, or on that last pin, brightening up highlights, further making that brights and darks separate. So when all of that gets added together, I'm going to turn that off. And let's take a look at this area of the sky, because it's very obvious right through here, and you'll see it on the edges as well. But this is some nice shadowy gray tones going through here. When I turn back on those radial filters, it's even more accentuated, right? I've got more texture, depth, really. Not so much texture. It's not like grit and detail, but it's depth and you're seeing the separation of these various clouds. One last adjustment was with a brush. I'll turn that back on. And this one's super subtle. You may have not even noticed it. Off and on. I'll hover over the pin. It's just a little bit of dodging on the deep shadowy areas of those ripples of sand. So when I'm working at 100% and seeing every bit of detail in there, that added another layer of dimension to these ripples. So just darkening those darker parts ever so slightly made up the whole difference. So all added up, we end up with this final photo here. I did not do any type of vignetting. Right? I didn't do anything with the vignettes at all. So let's take a look. I'm going to hit the reset button to kind of reset everything for just a moment. So here's reset. This is what originally came out of the camera. Decent exposure. You saw a little bit of that crop change there. But wanted to add in depth into the clouds, really accentuate these darker parts versus these brighter parts, and play up the ripples here, but really draw the eye in. That's where the darkening of the sand came in, to draw the eye in. These arrows, this arrow-shaped cloud drawing everything in. Let me undo that reset, and we'll see the final image here. I think the tip of the week is that you can use your gradients or your radial filters as dodge and burn tools. Couple that with a range mask or a color mask, and you can target very specific areas or tonal areas of a region and darken them or brighten them. And it's an additional way of doing dodging and burning. I used a brush on the sand, but you can also use the radial filters or the gradient filters to do the same thing in larger areas. Well, that's going to do it for this week's In Post. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, please let me know in some form. You can like the video, you can leave a comment, share it with a friend. Social shares are so appreciated, as are your questions. If you've got a question about photography, please don't hesitate to ask. I'll turn an answer around, usually in a day or two, and your questions are immeasurably valuable. You'll get some information. Hopefully it's going to help you with your photography. You're going to make me stop and think about my photography too. I'm going to get better as a result. Everybody wins, right? We all get better together, and that's kind of the whole point of why I come and sit down at the desk week after week. Well, until next time, my name is Scott Davenport, and happy shooting.